Iran's missile barrage on Israel on April 13th and 14th was quite unprecedented. Never before has Iran attacked Israel in such a direct manner, launching missiles from its own territory. There is of course much political context to that, but the fact remains Israel has been put in a position where it felt it had to respond, which it did on April 19th. Israeli response was surgical rather than massive. Right now matters don't seem to be escalating, but if Israel keeps striking important Iranian targets, like its Syrian consulate, things might again flare up. So if that happens and Iran and Israel start regularly exchanging mass missile volleys, what then? This video will try to explore such an option from a geopolitical stance. How might the two countries fare geopolitically? Who would support them? How might other Middle East countries align? And finally, how would such an event impact the broader geopolitical landscape, meaning Russia, the war in Ukraine, China and its relationship with Taiwan, as well as the US and its stance towards Israel. The state of Israel has been attacked many times since its inception, but discounting proxy attacks such as Hezbollah and Hamas attacks, it's been decades since a similar attack. In 1991, Iraq fired 42 Scud missiles on Israel during the Gulf War. Israel was then convinced by the US not to react. The reaction wasn't necessary as the US was already disarming Iraq. But this time around, the US government made it clear it would not take any part in Israel's retaliation on Iran. Sure, it helped defend it, and it may keep helping in the future, but the exact scope of US involvement may very well be defined by how far both Israel and Iran go. Despite the current lull, Iran may keep using its proxy forces in other countries. Israel may keep striking those forces, and Iran may again respond to those with a mass missile attack. If Iran keeps doing that, it's unlikely Israel would constrain itself to symbolic counterattacks. Eventually, such an exchange of fire might lead to many casualties and strategic targets hit. Iran and Israel may find themselves in a war. Israel's standing with the world was not that good just months ago. Given its heavy-handed approach in Gaza, even the US was trying to carefully choose words and actions, not fully supporting the Israeli government. Then, as we saw against Iran, it went full in to help defend Israel from the strikes. Yet it did not want to have anything to do with Israeli retaliation, at least not officially. Israel, for its part, seems fed up with Iran. Iran's decade-long funding and arming of the proxy groups near Israel is what caused Israel to go to war, first against Hezbollah in the 2000s and now against Hamas in 2023. Israel may use this opportunity to seriously try to go after Iran, provoking a continued exchange of fire which may lead to not just striking Iran's missile-producing facilities and nuclear-related facilities, but also doing to Hezbollah what they did to Hamas, as Hezbollah is Iran's biggest proxy force by far. But if Israel does go that far, it means it's stepping on quite a few toes. It means it's potentially involved in another humanitarian crisis, this time in Lebanon. Its political standing with even some Western countries has been on a shaky ground after Gaza. On one hand, Iran's strike on the 13th helped it there, but if Israeli leadership reacts too heavily to it and doesn't try to de-escalate, it could be perceived as undesirable to work with in the eyes of even some Western countries. Jordan might have actively helped defend Israel, but would it keep doing it if Israel is getting attacked from all sides? Saudi Arabia and UAE share data on Iran's attack on Israel, thus helping more indirectly. That already shows some hesitancy. Sure, Saudi Arabian leadership dislikes Iranian leadership, after a decade of proxy meddling in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, etc., all preceded by a wider ideological rift between Shia and Sunni Muslims. Yet time heals some wounds, and in 2023 it seems China brokered some sort of reapproachment. Iran and the Saudis resumed official diplomatic relations, something that had been cut since 2016. Saudis are of course influenced by the US, but in the last decade or so also by China. At the same time, despite decent relations with Israel, Saudis do not recognize Israeli sovereignty. In 1973, some Saudi troops fought against Israel. The relations with Israel were following an upward direction, but that seems to have paused since the Israeli military entered Gaza. So right now, it may seem slightly more plausible that the Saudis would let Iran and Israel fight it out and sit on the sidelines. Syria and Iraq are already quite cozy with Iran, and it's unlikely that would change if a war breaks out. While they would have reason to stay neutral simply to protect themselves from the fallout, Iran does operate proxy forces in both. So if Israel goes after those proxy forces, the two countries might unwillingly get involved into another war. Qatar was already closer to Iran, so much so that the Saudis at one point wanted to isolate them. UAE is not likely to do much on its own and will likely just follow Saudi's example. Egypt too, on the other side of the Middle East, has no skin in the game and would plausibly conclude their best course of action is to stay neutral. Now, all those countries not really helping Israel nor helping Iran would not mean much to Israel. Israel would still have enough military power to likely successfully wage strikes on Iran. Any direct ground war with Iran would be out of the question, of course, as distance and countries in between preclude that. Israel might not have the sheer power that the US might bring against Iran, but it may have the willpower to stay the course and keep striking Iran for months, if not years. We said the US might want to stay neutral, like it announced, and it plausibly would stay neutral on the surface, but indirectly it's likely US intelligence gathering assets would be used to collect real-time data on Iran, and that data would be shared with Israel. Perhaps even some unannounced shipments of air munitions might be possible. The US would need to be careful though. If it's openly and directly helping Israel, and if it gets dragged into a war, then its broader geopolitical game might suffer. One possibly unexpected winner of that might be Ukraine. It's curious that after basically half a year of no new Ukraine aid bills, the US finally approved more aid, alongside aid for Israel, just after Iran attacked Israel. Now imagine a situation where the US gets dragged into the Iran-Israel war so much that it openly helps Israel. Then that would be a step closer to US meddling into Russia's business directly, as Iran is an important ally to Russia right now. Lawmakers in the US might simply lump Iran and Russia together as enemies, and those military aid bills for Ukraine and Israel that have recently restarted might perhaps increase several times over, including a lot of supplies for Israel, if that's needed to defeat Iran more swiftly. Defeating Iran here means bombing it severely. Not even the US would send ground forces against it. Russia would inversely be furious with such an event. It relies on Iran to supply it with part of its weapons. Iran is basically the one big party helping Assad remain in power in Syria, which houses Russian forces. Without Syria, Russia might lose its footprint in the Middle East. And in Ukraine, instead of the gradual successes that Russia was seeing in the last several months, Russia might see a renewed effort by the US to supply Ukraine. New aid has already started, but it may increase even further, possibly slowing down or pausing further Russian advances, and making their whole war in Ukraine even more costly than it is. The US certainly doesn't want an all-out war in the Middle East, as then it would have to step in and help Israel, being a long-time ally. And given its obligations against Russia in Ukraine and its arms race against China in the Pacific, the US may feel it would get stretched out too much if it gets dragged into a big long air campaign against Iran. If the US manages to stay neutral, China is not going to be better off than it is now. But if the US gets dragged into a limited conflict, that means US firepower, US aircraft and weapons will get worn out to some extent. And some of the newest US systems may get shown in action, which helps China analyze them, like F-35 signature. Hell, even just Israel using F-35s over Iran might compromise F-35's fighting chances against China to some small extent. Would China get bold enough to use up such an event to threaten Taiwan even more? That's impossible to answer, but it is a possibility. However, US involvement in Iran could also be a double-edged sword. If the US manages to rally other countries around it, not just Middle Eastern ones but also European ones, if it manages to conflate Iran with Russia as a single axis of evil opponent, then China might suddenly be facing a very wide and quite united front. China is already intertwined with Russia and is basically the economic lifeline of Russia. China could then very well start being regarded as the part of that so-called axis of evil. So China might be looking for that fine line of US getting involved to some degree against Iran, but not getting so involved that it uses its war against Iran as a springboard for a wider coalition against China as well. Given that said line might be too fine and too hard to achieve, it's possible China would prefer not to worry about another war, and might engage in earnest tries to mediate the conflict, to get Israel and Iran to a table to talk it out. If it's regarded by many countries as a successful peace mediator, it could be an opportunity for China, kind of like it managed to do with the Saudis and Iran in 2023, when it mediated their diplomatic deal. The US would likely be doing the same, trying to get Israel and Iran to reach some sort of settlement, but of course coming from completely different reasons than China. Both superpowers have their own interests in the game. China has good relations with both Israel and Saudis, and decent relations with Iran, with only the US sanctions really standing in the way of China warming up further to Iran. China might spread its influence in the Middle East further if it manages to secure such a peace deal. The US leadership doesn't need the uncertainty of another big war and oil prices skyrocketing, as those might impact its elections later this year. It doesn't want to spend precious resources on fighting Iran, nor on defending Israel unless it's a must. Going after China through Iran is a pie-in-the-sky scenario, which may not be worth the effort or risk. Plus, there's another reason why many countries like Saudi Arabia, US and China don't want the conflict to escalate. Right now, for some 2 decades, Iran seems to have halted or slowed down its efforts to develop a nuclear bomb. In 2007, the US National Intelligence Estimate said Iran halted its nuclear weapons program in 2003. The IAEA said it had evidence work continued on a smaller scale in 2011, though later in 2015 and 2018 it said it had no evidence of Iran furthering its nuclear weapons program during the 2010s. But after Israel announced it would respond to Iran's attack, the Iranian commander of nuclear security said Iran might review its nuclear doctrine if attacked by Israel, a thinly veiled threat of continuing its efforts to build a bomb. Basically, no one wants Iran to have the bomb. To date, even Iran didn't want the bomb, as it stopped the research, fearing that testing a bomb might invoke US and Israeli attacks. Perhaps they felt they weren't ready to deal with Israel back then. But now, if Israel already attacks Iran, then there would be little reason not to try to get the bomb. Iran getting the bomb means further nuclear proliferation. Who knows who else might want the bomb next? Saudis have already said they would look into it if Iran gets it. Other countries like Turkey, Taiwan, South Korea and so on might also use the opportunity and go for the bomb. If Iran is allowed to do it, why shouldn't they as well? Which is why both the US and China don't want Iran to have the bomb. There would be far too many new and dangerous variables in play. Big nuclear powers like being the only ones with the bomb. They don't want a myriad of countries having it as well. With Israeli attacks increasing the chance of Iran really going for the bomb, it's no wonder pretty much everyone wants the situation to simmer down. We'll see if the world will indeed be so lucky. So, as you may have seen in our community post yesterday, we hope to go see the Civil War movie this weekend. It features a kind of a similar topic to one of our fantasy what-if scenarios from back in the day. In our 2020 video, we spoke about the hypothetical war between California and Texas. The Civil War movie has them as allies, but it's all fantasy. No spoilers please, but it's an interesting setup. Anyway, next week we plan to go back to a Ukraine topic. We will cover the new US aid and whether that will be enough in the short term. Ultimately, civil war or other war, there's too much war. Striving for peace is better. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, or even consider becoming our patron. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.